Good morning, everyone.
Morning, Skura.
Morning, Andre. Morning, Graham.
Morning, Andre.
Morning, Skura.
Morning, everybody. Morning, Skura.
Morning.
Morning. I'm busy driving, so videos off.
Morning, Kevin.
How's it?
Morning, everyone.
Morning.
Morning, and welcome to the practice breakfast, everyone. Such a beautiful day in Durban. I'll just go straight to it because of time. Today we have Wandile Mthiyane, who's going to be talking to us, and as usual, we'll just hear out his presentation, and then afterwards there'll be interaction. So Wandile is an Obama Fellow, TEDx Fellow, Resolution Fellow. He's a speaker, social entrepreneur, founder of Ubuntu Design Group, an architectural microfinance organization that focuses on social impact design projects in housing and urban design. Wandile studied his BSA and MArch at Andrews University in Michigan. He's also a lecturer at University of at UKZN and DUT. So today he's just going to take us through his journey and what he's been involved in. Wandile, over to you.
Thank you very much. I think I should probably update that bio to have lectured at UKZN and some past tense there. But I mean, I'm excited to be here with you all. But yeah, let's get to it. Let's get jiggy with it. I'll share my screen.
What is home? I was born into an environment shaped by apartheid, and I've been struggling with the concept of home since I was a child. I want to give the next generation of kids the experience of home that I never had.
Ubuntu Design Group changes the ways we look at informal settlements. Co-designing communities, putting the people as the lead architect of their community and homes.
We believe that no one knows best where they're going to live than the person who's actually going to live there. I never really had a place to call home. In a selfish way, I'm doing what I'm doing to find out what home is. Apartheid architecture pushed a certain group of people.
They've put up and pulled down RDP houses 4 times.
Into sort of the worst conditions.
These contractors that aren't really building proper houses. I mean, houses don't even last 5 years.
In government setting, there's a lot of people with money who come and throw money to the problem.
A lot of money is being wasted currently.
You've got to start seeing it as being something which builds from the bottom, because that is socially sustainable.
Why am I doing this?
Why am I doing this is a question I ask myself every day. Why am I doing this? Again, I just want to say I'm honored to be doing this talk and having a conversation with you all this morning. If I don't look very excited, it's because it's 7 a.m. and I never do talks at 7 a.m. So I'm still trying to also like wake up at the same time. I think we cannot talk about architecture without talking about leadership. I think architects are leaders in shaping culture and in shaping society. Whether or not they decide to acknowledge that is a different point, but at the core of what we do is leadership. And when I look at the leaders that I look up to, one of those key leaders is President Obama. President Obama says something that is profound. I had the privilege of meeting President Obama for the first time in 2019 in Chicago. So this is a photo of us together with President Obama in Chicago at the Obama Summit. I am not in the photo. I don't know what I did to that photographer to crop me out, but I promise I am just to the right, just to the right of where the crop is. But he said something very important and profound that has stuck with me over the years. And it's the idea that he's like, well, you know, when I was president, he would have these summer interns who type A, you know, brilliant students who come from Harvard and different prestigious schools, and they would work for him during the summer. And at the end of the summer, he would have sort of like a forum where he has a Q&A and have sort of a session with the interns. And, you know, they'll ask questions, smart questions about different things. But inevitably, someone will raise their hand and say, so how do I become president? So he chuckles and laughs. Like, well, when I was your age, you know, 23, 22, I wasn't thinking about becoming president. You know, it's like I was probably chasing girls in Colombia. But something happened. It's like I would have young people my age who were part of the African National Congress come over to Oakley College in California when he was there, and to Colombia, and they would talk about the struggle with apartheid and the work they were doing. And it's like seeing them and their commitment to creating a better South Africa and a better living, not just for themselves or their families, but for their community and country at large, inspired him to realize that he also had a responsibility towards his fellow countrymen. And it is through these young people that he was able to start investigating within his context what he can do to be the change that he wants to see. And then he says, you know, you can't change a country without being able to change a state. You can't change a state without being able to change a city. You can't change a city without being able to change your neighborhood. You can't change your neighborhood without being able to change yourself. And I think too often we've relegated leadership to icons who've ended apartheid like Nelson Mandela, or led the civil rights movement like Martin Luther King or Malcolm X. But I think what we forget is that at some point in their lives, Malcolm, Martin, or Nelson were all in our positions. It's a series of daily choices that they made and a specific commitment to the equity of their fellow countrymen that today we see them as icons. But they were just regular people who wanted to bring about positive change with the little that they had. And there was no specific profession, you know. Nelson was a boxer turned lawyer. MLK was a pastor. Malcolm was a man of the streets. And somehow they all sort of shaped today for the better. So I think this is an important question for us as architects and designers who are shaping the world. How are we shaping this world, and what type of leadership have we subscribed to in doing so? See, children around the world love to play house. Growing up in an informal settlement, Emma would, you know, me and my friends were no different. Well, except our houses were too small to play house in. So we'd come together and gather scrap metals to build our own little playhouse. You see, in my neighborhood, there was no architect because everyone was an architect. When a new member came in, the whole community would come together and use those leftover materials to build them a home. So it is in this context that I learned the importance of being resourceful. So we'd gather these scrap metals and would build our little playhouse, and it will fall on us, and we'll try again, and through trial and error, it will eventually withstand weather elements. And then we'd all run, you know, to our different respective homes. One will still rise, another beans, another some spices, and we will come and cook in our little playhouse. Now, in retrospect, this was not the most fire-safe thing to do, but the food sure tasted good. That may have to do with the fact that we had stolen it. But that's shaped, even though we didn't have, Xbox and PlayStations or the most fancy tools, that sort of shaped my upbringing. It's shaped our childhood. And I think it is important, as you can tell from this photo, we were tad lighter skinned back then, but with the sun and global warming, things have changed. I think I don't want to romanticize sort of the struggle of growing up in an informal settlement, but to kids, as you can see, there's a lot of joy playing with, a soccer ball made out of plastic and just having fun. But to our parents, it was a nightmare. They had to worry about the fact that the house would leak when it rained, or the fact that if the too heavy of a wind, the house could fall on us. It is there that I realized, through the lens of my parents, the importance of dignified housing. This idea that without a dignified house, you don't have a physical address. And without a physical address, you can't apply for a job. And without a job, you don't have an income. And without an income, you can't build a home. And that creates this vicious cycle of poverty. It is there where I learned that housing affects all key areas of our human lives. It affects education, because if you've got 10 people living in a one-room shack, there's never space or time for that grade 1 student to come back and do their homework. So they will never do their homework, and they're always going to be behind in class. It affects health, because the moist from the mud brick homes would affect my sister, who was struggling with asthma at the time. And I vowed to myself and my parents from a young age that I wanted to grow up and change that for other families and for other people within my community. Again, as I said, I didn't have the languaging or the wording of what it means to be an architect, because no one was an architect in my community. So I went to architecture school, studied architecture at Andrews University in Michigan. The sole goal of using architecture as a vehicle to alleviate poverty and build communities that give everyone an equitable chance at success. When I got to architecture school, I quickly realized that low-income housing and affordable housing and urban design within low-income communities wasn't quite seen as architecture. It was sort of this charity thing in the peripheral, and real architecture was random shapes that looked like the obelisk and different stacked shapes in Denmark. So I started challenging this notion, saying, well, are you guys telling me that then we're all here to study to serve the top 1% of the world who can afford these random shapes? Or is there more to architecture than that? Or does architecture exist to serve sort of the well-being of the larger society? In challenging that as a sort of a protest, I started a Ubuntu Design Group. I think it's also important to note this. There's this notion in the West that if you're poor, you chose it. This idea of pull yourself out by your bootstraps, right? Like this idea that folks are lazy or uncreative. We live in informal settlements and townships and low-income communities. But that could not be further from the truth, because when you look at this particular informal settlement in Soweto, you realize that these are houses built out of literally everything. I can spot a tire, a microwave, a chair, stones, mud brick, corrugated steel, random wood, and a bunch of other things. To me, it doesn't get more creative and resourceful than this. If these people are able to create homes out of practically anything, that shows a great deal of ingenuity. So my role as an architect or studying architecture was not so that I could come and tell them how to live or how to design spaces or places. But I wanted to be able to harness the creativity that already exists, combine it with some of the practical structural knowledge that I got from architecture school to shape buildings and spaces and places where we all belong, where everyone can be able to thrive and be able to get jobs and create a happy living for their families. But that isn't the case. So, you know, you have, as we're starting to do research and trying to figure out how to sort of solve this housing problem, which is really an age-old problem, whether you're looking at it in America or in England or in South Africa. No one has quite effectively found the best solution to solve sort of housing in a scalable way that has spread. So with South Africa, obviously there's a little more than what meets the eye in the challenge of housing, because now you're looking at the history of, you know, apartheid or apartheid and colonization, etc. But I think what the apartheid architects did was very effective. I once said it was genius, and then people attack me on Twitter, so I'll say it's very effective. So creating all of these townships sort of as labor camps to fit into our cities, and creating networks of roads and railways to connect them there, and then creating curfews at like 6 p.m. where Black people couldn't be in the city and they had to go back to these communities, and intentionally devoiding these communities from economic opportunities, gathering spaces, because that would have political implications, and, you know, building these giant beer halls right next to where the factories and the men worked. So they're already emasculated. They're living in a 2-room bedroom with their kids and their wife. There's no sense of privacy. And then you give them beer as an outlet. So they spend all of their money sort of drinking this depression and problems away, which obviously increases sort of gender-based violence, but also disenfranchises Black people from being able to develop their own communities, which are the townships, because, you know, these homes are often like either half of 40 square meters or 2 rooms, you know, located about 40 kilometers away or further. And people were forced to spend 40% of their income and more commuting to work, which again disenfranchises them from being able to sort of build their own community. Now, I don't know, these houses were built in the 40s, 50s, a lot of these townships. So all these years after, I grew up KwaMashuga. Our parents still commute to work in town predominantly. And I think now there's Umhlanga is sort of like the new CBD. And they still are spending 40% or more of their income. And they're still disenfranchised of being able to sort of spend that money back for Marshall, right? So like the major malls are still in these particular predominantly white areas, and also town, etc. So the money doesn't really stay within our communities. And so what these guys designed back in the 50s still affects us today. And this
Sorry, one C-section is by is next to Dutch Road Station, right?
C-section is close to a station. Yeah. Like
yeah.
The main station.
The unemployment rate, I think, is almost half. The people, I think it's around 40% as well. Which is another problem,
yeah. So looking at all of those connections, and it's close to that train station.
Yeah, Dutch Road. Yes.
Yeah. No, Guamash train station, and then which takes you to Duff Road. Duff Road is close to A section.
Okay.
A in Boshrin. That's his Duff Road.
Okay, sure.
So yeah, you see this, but this leads us to something Churchill put best. Churchill says, "We shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us." Right? So we see stuff like the Phoenix Massacre and the protests that happened and sort of the racial collusions, and we're surprised at where that came from and how that happened. We still live in one of the most segregated cities spatially, right? And what that does, it creates these silos of echo chambers where we reinforce the same narrative of what we believe about each other. So it is very easy to polarize those types of neighborhoods because there's already particular perceptions, which leads to eruptions like what happened last year. But this is not unique to South Africa. America, it's just as bad, struggles through very similar issues. The difference is, unlike townships, they didn't have enough land to spread their homes apart. So what they did was just like built these towers on the sky, influenced by Le Corbusier, and that did not work out so well. So this is what we now know as "quote unquote" the ghettos or the projects. So the interesting thing about the projects in America, again, funny enough, a lot of these were also built around the exact same time the townships were built in South Africa in the 50s. So what would happen was they would build these giant towers, one door in, one door out. So if a particular gang would sort of like take siege of the doors, parents would feel scared to send their kids to school. So now you have kids who are staying at home. They become sort of like couch potatoes, affect education. If they go down to the park, they join a gang. And then, many years later, you see African-American communities suffering from issues such as diabetes and, higher unemployment, poor education, etc. Again, it's this idea of like, we shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us. So I think my big problem with architects is we like to absolve ourselves from responsibility. We're like, oh yeah, like we just make buildings, and all the other stuff is politics. So it's that, so this. But let me draw a narrative for you. Let's use America, for example. George Floyd gets killed by a cop in Minneapolis, if I'm not mistaken. And the world is outraged. There's protests. Black Lives Matter. We need to change. Blah blah blah. And the blame is on the police. Don't get me wrong. American police are a very different breed of people. So yes, they some of that is definitely very warranted. But let's take it back. So you have the GIJ bill back in the 30s and the 40s. And then there's redlining in America. where they sort of, like apartheid, created versions of townships. So it's like, oh, white people are living in Durban North, black people are living in Kwamash. They literally did the same thing. And then they said, well, and then the banks would ring fence them. I think the only difference is that America is better at virtue signaling than South Africa can ever be. They're great at narrative. So they don't have to call it like apartheid or this or that. They just like tell a different story. It's like, no, like it's, you know, redlining, etc. So they separated these communities. They incentivized the white communities. So you could get like a mortgage subsidized by the government to build your home, etc. And architects would design these places like Levittown. Whilst on the other end, Black Americans lived in ghettos in projects like this. And they rented and they did not have any home ownership. So what ends up happening is that some 40, 50, 60 years later, what the homes that white families got for like $10,000, $20,000 are now worth $350,000 to $500,000. They can now use those to get loans to send their kids to college against their mortgage. Whilst on the other end, African American communities haven't been able to accumulate wealth. The most effective way of accumulating wealth is home ownership. So now you look at, you know, the crime rates, you look at uneducation, because also in America, the taxes, like if you live in Durban North, you'll have better schools because the money from Durban North taxes goes towards that. And, you know, if you live in Guamash, you'll have poor schools because it's also shaped that way. So you have Black neighborhoods having no home ownership, poor education, high unemployment, which statistically is connected to a lot of higher crime rates. And higher crime rates, because of desperation and need, which results in higher crime rates. And then higher crime rates justifies higher policing. Higher policing in Black communities means that Black people are actually going to get shot and killed by the police in America, right? So it's easy to look at the snapshot and say, oh, police are bad, they should stop being racist, etc. But who designed those segregated neighborhoods? Someone made those neighborhoods. And it is intentional that they're like that. So when we see the same challenges, Guamash, and also I think just RDPs are just a continuation of the legacy of apartheid in the way they're shaped. When we see these people on the e-news, like, what is wrong with these people? What is wrong with their communities? Like, no, what's wrong with the architects who designed it for them? Because we've designed these places for failure, and that's exactly what's happening. So we wanted to flip the model with the Winter Design Group. We wanted to listen to them. We realized that there were three things that made affordable and social housing fail. Number one was, for some reason, when we're designing for low-income communities, we believe that we shouldn't listen to them. We should just make whatever we think is right. So we believe that no one knows best where they're going to live and the people are actually going to live there. So we wanted to listen to those. So this is us, Mbumbulu, working with the Gogos at a community meeting, but also bringing in the young people, the future of that particular community. These are like high school students from Mbumbulu and Kwamash who are having a design charrette to them on what they would like to see their future look like. These are some of the most brilliant and smart kids who are able to tell us, like, oh, this is where the gangsters at, this is where you can get weed, this is where this is where we're scared to walk, etc. So all of these insights that then shape the urban design scheme that we came up with. This is us walking with the Izindunas around Mbumbulu, showing us the area and giving us a little bit more insight into the context. And that's us at the Durban University of Technology, talking to architecture students who come from these communities, who have an architectural understanding, and also sort of helping us bridge the two gaps. So this is the current RDP affordable housing, and this is the Ubuntu home model that we defined, building to enable. So the idea is, could a house be more than just a place to sleep at? Could it also be a place that enables opportunity, that enables commerce, that enables a family to financially sustain themselves? So each home that we build has a commercial space to it to enable that family to financially sustain themselves. Like South Africa has a 40% unemployment rate. Giving a person a home is not going to feed them. How are they going to maintain that home? And yeah, I get it. Not everyone is entrepreneurial, but you can always rent out that particular space, have it as an Airbnb, or use it for business. So each home has that, and we wanted to have sort of these clerestory windows to allow light in, passively make the house passively sustainable with cross ventilation, so that they don't have to use any heating and cooling, but also so that they can turn their lights on a tad later at night, and and then enable Ubuntu. So it's never about just listening to build or building to enable, or it's never about one house or one school or one park. It's about all of these things coming together to create a vibrant neighborhood. And you do not see that in the RDP. You see this thing that they built here. There isn't even roads for people to come into these houses, right? So you're already telling the people here, it's like, what, we want to lock you in this low income house. You cannot, it disincentivizes you from even thinking about having a car, because where are you going to park it? How are you going to drive in? And we wanted to create flexible homes so that as the family grows in number and economy, they can add on. But again, it's not about the home, it's not about the school, it's not about the park, it's not about the church. It's about all of these things coming together and creating a vibrant neighborhood.
So Wandile, these are just formal structures, but really no thought in how they are placed into their context and how people move and how people relate around them. The typical South African RTP.
Yes.
It's just a formal structure. It's like, if I take you out of the shack, then you must be grateful.
Yes. And I think South African politics and everything sort of works like that. I think even race works like that. It's like, oh, why are they complaining? They should be grateful. At least they're no longer in apartheid, right? And I think the government and the folks doing the RTP also work from that same notion. It's like, well, it's better than what you had.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
So from this to this, how do we change our streets to be dignified, where young girls can feel safe to walk from home, create spaces for gogos to be able to trade? How do we create sort of economic hubs that aren't just a giant mall with Spa taking all the money back to Holland, but we have Sikoga Sonke, we have local retailers working with multinationals because we still need that money, but where not all the money sort of goes out of the community at the end of the day. How do we create community centers that are going to serve our youth, addressing issues such as drug abuse, and community centers that could be multi-purpose, that could be a church, it could be a place for funerals and for weddings, and for community meetings. Could a garden wall be more than just a garden wall? Could it also be a place to sit at? How can we start rebuilding our language of architecture, drawing from traditional architecture, which is very sustainable, from grass thatch? And if we start valuing some of those things again, what ends up happening is that we're creating a new skill set, we're creating jobs, but also we're valuing sort of our contribution to the community, and we can then start innovating. Because I think one of the challenges with African architecture, sort of structures like Ikukwa and etc., is that with colonization and the building of Victorian, Edwardian, blah, 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 buildings, it was stifled from growth, right? So of course it still looks like a round pot, but that's because it was not given the same opportunity to sort of evolve and grow, because it was seen and demonized throughout time. So changing spaces like this to places that enable dignity and commerce, This is the current Umbumbula intersection. And this is sort of what we propose as an oasis. I think when you drive past here, you think you can drive to Peter Maritzburg and also switch through a game reserves or Itala game reserve, I'm not sure. But like, how do we create a model for small towns in South Africa that is vibrant, that can sort of serve commerce? How do we create a sort of a light industrial? Actually, this community is known for producing weed even before it was legal. So it'd be interesting to see how they could actually benefit from it now being legal. But again, these are not the people who are going to benefit. It's the people who have money who are going to build these giant factories in different places. So how do we start intentionally addressing commerce and dignity, but also creating something that is contextual and truly good? You can't see a place like this in Rome. This has to be inherently Umbumbula and have an identity. We don't go to Rome to see skyscrapers, right? We go to Rome to see Roman buildings. And I think as South Africa, we need to move away from this sort of multinational architecture and start creating our own language that is contextual. And I think that's really is what's going to boost tourism for small towns and places like this. This is some Charlie family that we designed and built a home for. The father was in a car accident in 1997. It's been on a wheelchair since. The mother was lives with disability. She's got unequal legs. And this is them on their first day in an Ubuntu home. So you can see the smiles on their faces. And they had given their 15-year-old son to relatives because they didn't have a place to stay. They had lost their home due to a mud break. One of those rains was a mud brick home. So this is their home. Their son has a room. It's handicap accessible. They're running a daycare. They've got over 18 kids in this daycare. They've tripled their income. This is an old photo, like maybe 2-3 years ago. It has a fence now, tripled their income. They have a car. They've built a 2-bedroom apartment in the back that they're also renting out. And it's been beautiful. They have like DSTV and everything. It's been beautiful to look at them move from sort of this low income to sort of middle class. And this goes to show that like people aren't lazy. They just don't have a chance and a leg to stand on. I think dignified housing and creating economic opportunities is the first step towards that. One of the unintended impacts of this project is very fascinating was, having students from UKZN and DUT come and work with us in building the home, and students of different races, as you can tell. And I remember some of the white students pulling me aside and saying, we wouldn't have even driven by this neighborhood because of what we've been told about people who live here. But since we've come here and worked in this project, we've never felt more at home. We've never felt safer, and we've never felt more welcome. So thank you for making us be a part of this project. And that's special because we start realizing that like if we sort of come together and work towards creating change for a better South Africa for all, we start realizing that we're actually more alike than we are different. And then a lot of these shackles of our past start breaking down, because at the base, racism doesn't make any sense. But because there's some economic value for certain people within that particular space, and in preserving those legacies, folks would hold on to it and continue to hold on to it.
Wandile Mthiyane says he wants to be an architect of change to fight exclusionary practices in our country.
As soon as I walked in, the manager shouted like, "Hey, you can't eat here." And so I was like, that was a little strange. I asked him, "Why can't I eat here?" He said, "Well, are you a member?" I was like, "Well, I'm not a member." He was like, "Yeah, sorry, members only."
After sharing his experience on social media, he says a club member told him if he had a problem with their club, he should open his own restaurant.
I didn't have as much resources to do something as fancy, but I created this anti-racist pop-up restaurant as a response to that. And we're going to have it on top, physically on top of where the Durban Undersea Club, just so that we can create options for our people to have access to food in their own city.
The chairman of the club denies the racism claims and says he's open to speaking with Mthiyane.
And yes, it is predominantly white, but it's rapidly changing. And how that changes is when we get a black member, he's got friends. And he'll come down and bring a friend to the club who says, oh, it was a really nice experience. How do I join?
Mthiyane will be serving up his anti-racist hot dogs in Glenwood and on the Durban Promenade soon. The privileged dog, black vegetarian, and the anti-racist burger are some of the options you can find on the menu. Nabila Sheikh, Durban. Wandile Mthiyane says he wants
the anti-racist hot dog. So we built that house. It's a huge success, but we haven't been able to scale it. We created a micro-mortgage bank and talked to a couple of investors in the United States, and we're talking to different banks. And we quickly realized that banks were not built to serve the poor. Just how it is and how it's structured. That's why you don't get a mortgage within a particular threshold. So I wanted to create a micro-mortgage model that enables those families to also have access to dignified housing and financial inclusion. So we created our own version of the micro-mortgage bank. And when we were ready to launch in 2020, the global pandemic hit. So that all came to a crash. Needless to say, that project that I just shared with you all is in pause as we were trying to figure out how to sort of rebuild it. And I think it's important for architects to realize that like our work doesn't exist in silos. It's work, it obviously exists within the context of the economy, it exists within the context of politics, it exists within the context of a market. So that's been a huge learning curve because I never learned all of those things or how to connect those dots in college architecture school. So yeah, we're trying to figure that out. And I think the government could not be more useless in actually solving the housing challenge. So, so there's that. Now, jumping to the anti-racist hot dog, which is what we're currently working on right now. As you saw, I was kicked out of the Durban Undersea Club. You know, it's like I'm not sure, it's like a 400 million rand project, I think by the city. With extension of the promenade. So I saw the project, and man, this is really cool. Let me try and go grab dinner. You know, one fateful Saturday night, as I walked in, the white managers, just as I stopped in, was like, "Hey, you can't eat here." I was like, "Oh, that's strange. Why can't I eat here?" He's like, "Well, are you a member?" So I think number one, I think let's pause and acknowledge that somehow he already knew that I was not a member. I was like, "No, I'm not a member. I didn't know you had to be a member to eat here." And then he was like, "All right, yeah, sorry, members only." I was like, "Okay, cool. Can I join the membership? Like, do you have a day pass?" He's like, "Oh, no day passes," which I later found that you can actually have a day pass there, but I was not afforded the opportunity. And then I was like, "Okay, can I join the membership?" He's like, "To join the membership, you have to email this person, who has to email that person, and this. I was like, "All right, I think you guys messed with the wrong one today." So I left and I researched them. Obviously, they have an all-white board. I looked at the constitution. And basically, there's two types of membership: there's sports membership, scuba diving, etc. We didn't have scuba diving that much, so I can't join that part. And then there's the social membership, where you can come and eat. But to be a social member, this is literally the requirement. You need to fill in a form with your address, submit your photo, have 2 members within the club co-sign, and these members need to come from 2 different families, like scuba diving or whatever, co-sign for you. And then all of those requirements that you just sent in actually don't matter, because then a committee will sit down based on underlying their opinion, decide whether or not you can be a member, a social member of the Durban Undersea Club. So, you know, structurally profiling at every creative level. And hence why when you walk by the Durban Undersea Club, it looks a very particular way, which is not necessarily reflective of the demographics of the city that it exists in. So as a response, I looked at, you know, protests, right? Like Black Lives Matter. When you protest, I realized that a lot of protest takes away from the victim rather than give to the victim. Because when you protest, you lose a day of work. In America, you could even lose your life, lose your dignity. I was like, well, how can we protest and have the message across and yet still solve the problem? So we designed and sort of built this little structure and created sort of the anti-racist hot dog stand where people of different races and colors could all come and enjoy an anti-racist hot dog. So this is the stand on top of the Durban Undersea Club at the promenade. And then we started launching these monthly parties called the Anti-Racist Hot Dog Party in collaboration with another private club, which is the KwaZulu-Natal Society of Arts. But you know what's the difference between DUC and KZN SA? Is that anyone can come into KZN SA and eat. And then, however, if you're a member, you've got like a 10% discount, and you're in, you know, you have a 10% discount to certain of their shows, etc., etc. So there's ways to be inclusive and still have a membership-based club. So this is one of our events at the KZN SA, where we had very productive dialogue on what does an inclusive post-apartheid city like Durban look like, and how can we all be collectively be a part of the narrative of shaping that. So what the Anti-Racist Hot Dog now does is we've moved beyond just public events, where we work with different architecture firms and different companies such as Deloitte Global in New York and different places on how to create inclusive workplaces where people can come to work and thrive using a narrative structure, this idea of the story of self. What is my own relationship and role towards creating anti-racism and histories with that? The story of us, what is our collective responsibility as a community in creating a space where others can come in and thrive regardless of their race, gender, or culture? And then the story of others, how does these principles then trickle down to our vendors? Are all the architects that I work with also Black like me, or are they all white? Are all my clients, do they all look the same? Are all my vendors, the people I subcontracted, how do we diversify that? How do we start creating structures and policies within our organizations to intentionally create inclusion outside of the virtue signaling B scorecard? Now this is exciting. I'm doing an event in Chicago coming up on the 8th of December. We're inviting President Obama to it. We're inviting TBCWA, the architecture firm that's designing the presidential center that I've had the privilege of sort of consulting with, and all Feeney Gang, all the leading architects in Chicago are going to be there. We're going to have the first anti-racist hot dog party experience in Chicago, where we're going to be looking at how does the architecture community come together in creating inclusive workplaces, which will in turn create an inclusive Chicago, especially with Chicago built on the legacy of redlining and all of these things. And one of the things we're going to use is a project that I'm excited about. We've built over the past year in New York City and here in Durban. It's called the Anti-Racist Hot Dog Cards. These cards are phenomenal because what they do is like they take away the responsibility from the person being the one to start the conversation, the inclusion of race or workplace culture. the question is already there. So as you walk into our experience, you grab a hot dog, house music is playing in the background. You've got one of these anti-racist hot dog cards. You're challenged to go talk to someone that you don't know or who doesn't look like you, and ask them what their question is. And you have sort of that discussion, which starts bringing up solutions on how to create an inclusive, either firm or inclusive workplace and an inclusive environment. So this is the ad for the cards that we're going to be launching in December with the anti-racist hot dog party in Chicago.
One card, go fish.
Not so fast. Boom! I got the race card.
You always play the race card.
I have the race card and the black card.
Well, what's the difference?
Slavery?
Well, I'm playing the woman card.
The woman card doesn't beat the black card.
Yes, it does when it comes with the Jewish card and the race card.
Does it include the race card though?
Well, it does if you count Egypt.
Slavery.
The black card beats the Jewish card.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, but I'm the true child of oppression. I've got the woman card, the race card, and the gay card.
It is not about the cards we're dealt. It is about the narratives we choose to create with them. The story of self. What is your relationship with race? And what is your role in creating an anti-racist environment? The story of us. What is our collective responsibility in creating an inclusive environment where others can come into work as their authentic selves and thrive? And finally, there's the story of others. How do these principles of anti-racism and inclusion trickle down to products, services, and ESG initiatives? It has never been about the individual cards. It has always been about the stories we choose to create together. And that is why the anti-racist hot dog card always wins. You're still here. Order the cards. The link is literally at the bottom. I know I'm pretty and everything, but still, order the cards.
Thank you.
Is that it? Are you done?
I think I'm finished.
Okay, lovely. Thank you so much, bro. I think that is an absolutely beautiful presentation. Yeah. Thank you so much, Wandile. It was essentially a journey of your development in architecture, etc. More than your work. Your work featured here and there, but it was more your journey. I come from rural Eastern Cape, formerly Transkei. I heard about architecture when I was in grade 11. How did you come to know about architecture?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. I had to leave Guamash to get to know about architecture. I had the privilege of going to a boarding school in Zimbabwe, actually. Historically known as Southern Rhodesia, in Bulawayo, in Bulawayo. In that boarding school, I was in my second year, and you know, we would have days where parents would come visit, but obviously mine wouldn't come because they would come all the way from South Africa. So one of my friend's parents visited, and he was an architect, and so that's the first time I met an architect and got to know about architecture. But Zimbabwe has an incredible education system where we were taught, like, one of the classes that you learn in high school practicals, and there's building, there's fashion and fabric, there's agriculture, there's arts. So I was in the building class, and I used to sort of like win the building award every year. And sort of everyone in school sort of knew that, oh, he's going to be an architect. So I think just going to Zimbabwe and learning from that perspective really shaped who I have become, and sort of given me all the opportunities that I have today.
Yeah. All right, great. Also, Wandile, the project at Mbumbulu, I don't like this when people say it to me, young architects. So I'm gonna say to you, I don't like it as well. But as a young architect, when you design, you never generally go for a very practical, pragmatic design. And the square at Mbumbulu is something that could be built. It's something that's very practical. It's something that is not, you're not trying to create a Dubai.
Yeah.
It's something that could actually be built. It makes so much sense.
Yeah.
And it takes an effort, and it takes a restraint and a knowledge and some sort of maturity from a young architect. Was there a feasibility study that done there? What made you feel confident that actually we can actually do structures like this at this scale, and this is what the area needs, this is what we could implement?
Yeah, no, we spent about 6 months doing a feasibility study with the community. I think it's important to note that one of the key pillars of the work we're doing with the Windser Design Group, etc., is we're driven by this concept of like listening to build. So what we do is informed by the need and what the community is looking for. I think, and then number two is like, we strongly believe that architecture is just a frame and people are the big picture. And I think it goes back to my narrative when I started, like, I never started architecture. I never did architecture to create skyscrapers in the first place. So that actually doesn't excite me. I studied architecture to do community design for low-income families. So unlike maybe other architects who are at this similar stage as mine, I wasn't tempted to try and create something that's not, right? So I wanted to be as contextual as possible. And I think this was our first step at that. I think we can still do better. I come in with the perspective that I'm wrong, and there's a lot that I need to learn. How do we make the community be the lead architects and we just become the vehicle to creating that? But ironically, it's interesting you sort of commend me for being practical there. I've been called naive quite a bit within the architecture circles, which is something I take with pride and as a compliment. Because yeah, I think you need to be naive if you want to really bring about change, right? If you accept things as they are, then you can never really do anything that is significant. I think there's the world as is, and then there's the world as it ought to be, and I exist in creating the world as it ought to be.
Okay, lovely. So colleagues, the institute obviously is the Institute of Architects in KZN, and mostly people who log in people from Durban. So it's always good to see one or two people from outside, Maritzburg, Lubrine, Lee South Coast. I saw a colleague from the Africa Union of Architects here, Prosper. Thank you for joining. Wandile, let's continue. The microfinance in terms of assisting a family to realize a home. How did that work for you, and how easy was it to go about that?
So the huge learning curve. Let's just say I had to sort of like go into a practical MBA program there. But luckily, you know, I went to college in Michigan. Some of my good friends, you know, are bankers at Goldman Sachs and different places. So I assembled a team. Definitely some of the stuff on sort of like interest rates and prime and subprime, etc.
Something that you don't learn from an architecture course.
Yeah, somehow architecture school doesn't cater to actually how do you get the money to actually build these homes. They're like, just build stuff.
Just build cool buildings from a good client.
Yeah, money will fall down from heaven. So no, I learned a lot, man. I learned a lot through that process, just about finance and how things work, and sureties, and mitigating risk, and all of those things. And I still have a lot more to learn there. And but yeah, I was just privileged that some of my close friends from college are these bankers. So whenever we're together, here in South Africa, they come over, or in New York or Chicago, and we sit down and we're constantly like cracking the model, trying to figure out like how to make it work. But yeah. So, but if I'm to explain how it works, it was like, well, currently, like when you get a mortgage, you need to pay like 20% down payment or something like that, and then you need to have your architect's builder approved by the bank, and there needs to be assessments, etc. So like a family that's living paycheck to paycheck, maybe they will, and you need to use 1/3 of your income. Shouldn't be more than 1/3 of your income to pay the mortgage. Just legally with FSP laws in South Africa. So the biggest barrier is there's a lot of young professionals like myself who work in architecture firms, barely making a living, and we don't have 20% of we don't have 20% of 500,000 rands layers a down payment. So what we did was we would take like PTOs, like permission to occupy. So people get land for like 5,000 from a king or whatever. And then we would come design and build that home for the folks, and then they move in. So kind of like rent. And then they start paying to own that space. Excuse me.
Okay, cool. Thanks, bro. Colleagues, I'll open the floor for questions and comments for Wandile. I think the beauty of your talk, Wandile, with some of the encounters you've had, racism, etc. It's something that somebody can't deny you mentioning or talking about, because it's a reality to you. It's something that happened to you. And that's what I think as society we must appreciate, is that someone doesn't go all out to try and cause discomfort, but we actually must be open to hearing each other, the struggles that we go through. I mean, at some point at the institute, we were talking about the realities that our female colleagues face in a construction site. You will not believe it. Something that as a man you don't even imagine. Some construction workers whistling at you and all of that. It's not our reality. And therefore, when a female colleague narrates it to you, it's not like because they are too sensitive, it's because that's their reality. And therefore, as the profession, what do we do about that? We have to understand all sides, so that we as a profession can work together to defeat a segregation of any kind. My past president, Mr. Bingham.
Thanks, Skura. And thanks, Wandile, for your wonderful talk and slides as well. It's very inspiring. Thank you. I see Jimmy's on this call as well. You may be interested to know that your visit down to the Durban Undersea Club, we wouldn't have even had a beach down there if it wasn't for people like Jimmy. You'll see his name on this call. He actually saved that beach for people still to use. But that isn't my point today. I just wanted to ask you a question about education. You said that you were schooled in Zim, and I think, and I agree with you, the Zim education is incredible, and I think it still is much better than ours here in South Africa. So I wanted to ask a question really related for Skura and his team to maybe take guidance from on how we can look to improve access to schools or school children to be considering architecture as their own futures. And I know we've had Be an Architect for a Day programs and that, and I'm just wondering whether you've got any insightful guidance for us in that regard. So aiming at schools and ways to improve knowing about architecture at schools. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I think there's a couple of good precedents we can learn from a couple of friends of mine who are doing this in Detroit and different parts of America. There's something called the Architecture Hip Hop Camp that happens during the summer, where they bring in these inner city kids from a township in America, from a ghetto or a project, and they teach them architecture. And they will do something as simple as like build a bench on the side of the road of their community. So there's like a physical object and there's a physical project that they participate in. One of my professors at Andrews runs a similar program called Renaissance Kids in Michigan, where he brings in like 13-year-olds and 12-year-olds and both high school and primary school kids to work together in designing and shaping a project within their community. And, so normally they would have like a partner who would say, okay, we have 50,000 rands for this summer to build something. And then he'll bring the kids, they'll look at different sites and spend 2 weeks designing something and with adults and build it. So it's those foundational experiences that shape kids. And a lot of those kids and they have architecture students who work for them to help out. Like I was one of those students who helped out. And some of those kids have then gone on to go to architecture school. So I think that's be worthwhile.
Thanks, Kev. Thanks, Wandile. The question of architectural education is a quite interesting one. There is no way you're gonna unearth the talent without reaching out to the furthest parts, of the province for people to be exposed to architecture. But at the same time, we actually have this challenge of admissions and all that. I don't know, Dr. Villashan Governor, whether you can comment on this, just in terms of the entries at university. I mean, the applications versus people who you can take for first year.
Thanks, Skura. Yeah, so actually, we're actually taking quite a number of students from lower income households. And we've changed the way we take in these students. Previously we used to ask for a portfolio, and the portfolio used to be draw a still life, sketch your house and things like that. But now the way it's focused is you use your own environment to actually develop this portfolio, because we realize the precedence that, a kid from, say, Amshlanga is used to is not the same what a kid from an informal settlement is used to. So the portfolio is centered very much around, their experience and their culture of where they're growing up. And we take this into account when we look at, the application. Also looking at, that not everyone is exposed to Model C schools, the art they do there as compared to a government school. So we are making initiatives and strides in bringing in, lots of people from diverse backgrounds. And I think it's showing with our new graduates that are coming through.
Sure. Any other comments?
Can I just
Yeah,
add
sure,
that?
Wandile.
Yeah, number one, I just want to give a shout out to KZN. Number one, I think UKZN is an incredible school, architecture school. In my books, the best architecture school in South Africa, particularly for undergraduates. Again, with the stuff on race and stuff like that, I think when I meet a lot of older white architects, they always have the same narrative, like, oh, UKZN used to be a great school and now it's gone to, blah, blah, bloody Nigerians or whoever is running it, blah, etc. Which is a unique skill to be both racist and xenophobic all at the same time. And so I got to go there and teach third-year studio. It was me, Tando, who has a master's from Oxford Brookes in England, and I think it was also Lawrence and Spoo, and it was incredible. Within the 3 semesters I was there, the students participated in PG Bison and design challenges in South Africa and around the world. They easily cruised through South Africa and won, and they won in Rome as well, as the best sort of students coming from UKZN. But again, you don't see that narrative in the media. You don't see that narrative in whoever writes the blogs on what the top architecture school is. And so I just wanted to sort of insert that UKZN is an incredible school. I had incredible diverse colleagues and diverse students. And I'll make it my own point that, over the next couple of months when I write an article for Architize or Arc Daily, to mention that so that I can change this narrative. And really the difference is that, the head of the architecture is Black now, right? And then all of a sudden, the perception is that education is subpar, and that could not be more further from the truth. Now, going back to the colleague who spoke about first-year students, I think it's important for architecture schools to really frame their curriculum in a way to understand the different levels of knowledge of architecture or whatever we think architecture is when they're coming to school. I fought with my professors in Michigan for 2 years, coming in designing around buildings, and the only understanding of building was a 4-room apartheid house from Kwamashu. So they just didn't understand what was I drawing, and I didn't understand why are we drawing wooden buildings. But it is when I brought them to South Africa, they're like, oh, Wandile, we get it now. So this is where you are drawing your sort of knowledge of architecture from. So I think we need to have grace on the students coming in, but we also need to know that the students are coming from different levels of technical abilities. And I think certain times architecture professors can be very mean. And I think we need to change that and have grace and create pathways for different students of different levels to be able to understand and learn.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions, guys? Ruben?
Thanks, Wandile. It's just so wonderful listening to you. And I've heard you before. And it's just the consistency of the story that buildings are just part of what we do, and that we are part of this greater continuous struggle, which sometimes kind of can consume us in many ways. But to demonstrate it through our work and demonstrate it through our being is what is as important as the practice of what we do as architects. I mean, the interesting thing is that speak of 2 different kind of philosophies in the same talk. One is that you mentioned pretty earlier, Obama's own journey, learning from stories from the African National Congress. But our own history would tell you that the African National Congress didn't have anti-racism as part of its cry. There was a Black consciousness undertaking which happened in the late 1960s. So we must still fight as anti-racists. We must continue to call it out whenever it appears, and never be afraid. And I like that little piece that you had on the card, because it's always an accusation. Whenever it's called out for what it is, that there's cards being thrown, whether it's the gender card, or whether it's the LGBTQ plus card, or any of these cards. And we do it, and we must continue to do it in our daily lives. And I'm so glad that you will continue with that story as part of your consistency in the way that you practice and talk about your architecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruben.
I just want to say thank you very much to Ruben Reddy. I think I was a skinny architecture student when I was starting this project back in 16, 17. And I think he was the president of the institute, and he had me come and speak about the work I was doing back then. And just, incredible warm welcome. And so I just want to say thank you to him, thank you to you all for having me and sort of giving me sort of the space to talk about these crazy ideas that I'm working on. And thank you to all the people in the comments for saying very supportive things.
Yeah, lovely. Wandile, from the quote by Churchill that we shape our people thereafter they shape us. It is important as an architect to have a very good sense of humanity, Ubuntu, and that's your approach. But you also take it further than what, I think that's what Ruben also touched on. You take it further than what a regular architect would do. I would not go and open a hot dog stand to make my stance. I would have a lesson learned and then see how I incorporate it in my daily working. How do you balance your activism, Jay, in society and architecture? Because you are involved, we are involved in a lot of other things. Even public speaking is something that is not of a regular architect, what a regular architect would do. Your public speaking, I mean. So how do you balance all of that? I'll call it activism, for lack of a better word, and practicing. How do you balance those two?
I think the first part is like, I don't know, I'm still trying to figure it out, right? Like, I think that's a daily challenge to balance all of these things of who I am. But I'm getting better at it over time. And I'm learning a lot. So I think 2020 was a rough year for us. I think it was a rough year for everyone, just like funding and finance wise. So we started taking like these fancy buildings that, some of square like mansions and stuff that we designed. And some of those buildings are starting to come up now, right? That I'm very embarrassed about. And they look good, but they're off brand. But that was an interesting challenge for me and my team when we did that. Purely for financial reasons, but also most of them were like family related. And I did not like how I was treated as an architect during those processes. I think there's a huge conversation around people not understanding the value of architects or architecture. I think there's that. But for me, I think you have crossed the line when that starts affecting my dignity.
Yeah.
And I think that comes just like from being Zulu. I think in the Zulu culture, it's like, it's never the act. that's wrong. Like if you hit someone, like it's not the act, it's not the actual hitting on the face. It's not it. It's the audacity that you thought you could do that and get away with. So I really had a hard time with clients in South Africa where I felt like they thought they owned me or my employees. Just like a lot of disrespect. But I also saw like there was a house I designed and just like the client, you know, was terrible towards me and my employees, etc. But that client was very nice towards a white interior designer, right? And the white interior designer ended up getting paid more than us who designed the house, which we're fighting for. I've also been in projects where I've been partnered with white firms, and all my clients have been Black. So, but you know, Black people who think that they're rich. So I've also been in projects where I have been partnered with white firms because they believed that I don't know what I'm doing or don't have quote unquote enough experience and need to learn from them. So sort of like as a face, and just like was treated terribly in those situations, which, you know, obviously broke my heart because I think I had a different respect within the architecture world in America, and then coming here to be treated in these particular ways. So I learned a lot. I learned a lot from that, and I think it's important for me to mention that like racism or white supremacy may be seen as something that's sort of obviously originates from the histories and relation to white people. So that the origin may be that, but the agents of white supremacy are very diverse. The agents of white supremacy are very diverse. They are what in our community we call deputy white people. So I definitely face quite a bit of that, and as a result, so I have stopped doing any of the luxury stuff and just continue to sort of focus on my mission and my work. But I wanted to say this to other architects here because I think it's a real challenge, and I think we ought to be treated with dignity and respect in every project that we work on.
Thanks, Wandile. I think I've seen one of the luxury houses you've done. One of the most refreshing, I think, presentations that happened on this platform was a while back when Bill Williams, who does a lot of cathedrals, admitted, you know what, some of the things we do, we are not happy about, and all architects can attest to that, but we don't actually want to talk about it. We don't want to share about it. We don't admit to each other that some of the projects we do, we actually don't like, but you have to earn something from it. It's just the reality of life. Colleagues, any more questions? Any more comments for Wandile? Are we all good? Well, Wandile, thank you so much for that. Well thought out presentation, very interesting journey. I think something from us, from all of us to learn from. I saw some of the comments here, the last one from Ivor, about being able to discover by speaking to people who, you know, that you're designing for. I think the very valid things that came out of your presentation. Thank you so much. Your parting shot. Wandile, just your last words.
Yeah, sorry, I was just making sure there wasn't noise in the background. Number one, I'm grateful to be here. Thank you for giving me the platform to have this conversation with you all. I have nothing but respect and love for the architecture community within Durban and KZN as a whole. So I appreciate everything. and really, thank you for having me here. And I think I'll go back to President Obama's saying that I live by these days. He says that change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for, and we are the change that we see.
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest problem with architects. We're waiting for someone else to save us. No one will save us. We need to be the change that we want to see. We need to be the ones who address these issues. So let's be that change.
Yeah, lovely, beautiful. Thank you everyone for joining this practice briefers. Thank you, Wandile, for a wonderful presentation. Join us again, please, in 2 weeks' time. And may everybody have a good weekend. Thank you.